They aren't true. This never happened. That's what Joe Biden said about Tara Reade's sexual assault allegations against him. And yesterday, Nancy Pelosi said, I'm a big fan of the Me Too movement, of course, but Joe Biden is Joe Biden. That's all you need to know.
For Kavanaugh, when you demanded a investigation on Justice Kavanaugh, when a very similar allegation came out on him,
well, let me just say, I respect your question, and I don't need a lecture or a speech. Here's the thing.
Testy.
I have complete respect for the whole Me Too movement. I have 4 daughters and 1 son, and there's a lot of excitement around the idea that women will be heard and be listened to. There is also due process, and the fact that Joe Biden is Joe Biden. There's been statements from his campaign, or not his campaign, but his former employees who ran his offices and the rest, that there was never any record of this. There was never any record. And that nobody ever came forward, or nobody ever came forward to say something about it apart from the principal involved. I am so proud. The happiest day for me this week was to support Joe Biden for President of the United States. He's a person of great integrity.
Nice pivot.
Yeah, good. I was going to say good spin. Well, Tara Reade's going to be on the Sunday talk shows. And Joe Biden, Mika said, you once said that every woman who has an allegation should be believed. And he doesn't know, he's not doing well. I'm watching this, and it's like watching a car wreck.
It's interesting that those of us who argued about the normative value of due process when investigating a complaint of this magnitude, whether it's so outside of a court of law, I should say, just the normative, the idea that due process is sort of who we are as a free people. You take serious allegations seriously, but you got to look into them before, say, you're a member of the press corps and you decide to try to ruin somebody's reputation or otherwise destroy their lives. Got to follow up. Got to make sure you know what you're talking about. Got to have evidence to support the claim in order to report it or advance it. So people were saying that when it came to Brett Kavanaugh and others. Now, all of a sudden, and we're saying at the time, wait till it turns on them and it's somebody that they like, somebody that's politically sensitive. You're going to hear that we need due process. Oh, of course I'm for this, and of course you have to take, and of course women have to be heard, and all that, but we need due process. Well, where was the due process normatively when the New York Times ran the Julie Swetnick allegations against Brett Kavanaugh without corroboration?
And President Trump brought that up last night.
Said that Michael Flynn would come back. Follow up regarding Joe Biden. Your campaign and surrogates going after him pretty hard with regard to these allegations from Tara Reade. What do you say to Joe Biden?
I don't think so. I don't think they're going after him hard with regard to Tara Reade.
Allegations, and what do you say to Joe Biden?
I don't know anything about it. I don't know exactly. I think he should respond. It could be false accusations. I know all about false accusations. I've been falsely charged numerous times. And there is such a thing. If you look at Brett Kavanaugh, this is an outstanding man. He was falsely charged. What happened with him was an absolute disgrace to our country.
Right.
And I guess 3 of the 4 women have now admitted that.
Okay. And so the standard is the issue. And, oh, by the way, it is worth noting, and credit to them, individuals like Crystal Ball, formerly of MSNBC, now anchors a Hill.com show, as well as Peter Beinart, as well as the Rachel Maddow impersonator on MSNBC, the guy, Chris Hayes, saying that the standard that we applied previously has to be applied here. Peter Beinart saying Joe Biden's Senate office should release whatever papers they may have that could be relevant to this investigation or this look-see at these allegations. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Bret Baier, Fox News anchor, #1 best-selling author of 3 Days at the Brink, FDR's Daring Gamble to Win World War II. Bret, thanks so much for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Morning.
Morning. So it's not just going to be waved off, it seems to me, with, the allegations aren't true statement by Joe Biden.
No, it's pretty definitive. And for him to come out and say he's urging the National Archives or giving them the wave to release any public documents of a complaint suggests to me that they've gone through and tried to find a complaint and maybe didn't. But perhaps even just by doing that, that gives you another element for the Biden people to say it didn't happen. Now, Tara Reid will have her say, and people will judge, her story. And obviously, she has more dots on the chronological timeline than Christine Blasey Ford did in the Kavanaugh case. But I think for us, the Kavanaugh handling of it shouldn't be the gold standard. It should be what we don't do.
Clearly,
as far as covering it. I will say that to Joe Scarborough's credit, he brought up a quote from Biden in 2018 in which Biden said, for a woman to come forward in the glaring lights of focus nationally, you've got to start off with the presumption that at least the essence of what she's talking about is real, whether or not she forgets the facts, whether or not it's been made worse or better over time, but nobody fails to understand that this is like jumping into a cauldron. And to Joe Scarborough's credit, he brought that quote up this morning.
Does Tara Reid have any evidence at all that this assault took place that you know of?
Well, other than the contemporaneous telling of friends, or at least around that time. And she points to that call in to Larry King and her mother, right? In which the show is about sexual abuse or sexual actions on Capitol Hill, and she calls into a talk show at the same time, contemporaneously, but doesn't really pinpoint the action, what happened. But it's another dot on the timeline, as I said.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me this is, unless there is some witness to the alleged events that is heretofore been silent, and Tara Reid hasn't identified as anybody potentially witnessing what she said occurred, then this just becomes, this happened to me, and I told a bunch of people, including my mom, and I talked about it over the years, but it's still just her against him in terms of their respective words. And so it seems to me that this is more a commentary on the quality of journalism inside the Beltway and on the Eastern Seaboard than it is potentially anything that has a lasting impact on Biden's candidacy, with the caveat, unless other women come forward to allege similar things.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that the disparity between coverage of Kavanaugh and this is really where the most hypocrisy is, and also some of the Democratic senators like Kirsten Gillibrand, who came out and said 100% that she's for Christine Blasey Ford and Swetnick and all those allegations, and then pushed to have her colleague Al Franken removed from the Senate, which really set off some Democrats. Now she's 100% with Joe Biden. So it's that disparity of comments or coverage that I think the story is. I'm not sure we're going to get to the ground truth of what exactly did or didn't happen with Tara Reid.
And just on that score with media, I mean, I have to go back to this Dean Baquet interview with that Ben Smith did for the New York Times a couple of weeks ago. That is just a remarkable interview for somebody with the stature of Dean Baquet, the executive editor of the New York Times, in the media. And I think it's been underreported what he had to say, because his answers to questions about the disparity in the coverage and why didn't the New York Times pick up this story and give it an airing for 3 weeks after the allegations resurfaced, even as thehill.com is doing it and some of these other outlets, his answers were laughable, frankly.
Oh, yeah, they were jarring. I mean, in part, he said, well, Brett Kavanaugh was in the spotlight and was a public figure in the middle of this hearing in the national consciousness. And, I mean, what is a presidential nominee?
I mean, right. And again, as I mentioned before you came on, to Julie Swetnick, the idea, well, we needed to give it time to to properly lay the foundation for our readers and understanding who Tara Reid is, because people wouldn't know her name. Who knew who Julie Swetnick was? And you went with an uncorroborated allegation you reported it the day of.
Right. And, a number of those women have walked things back, which we don't hear a lot about. But again, that's the most recent of the public allegations, but it's not one that we should use as a gold standard at all.
Speaking of underreporting, why the underreporting on Jared Polis in Colorado and Gina Raimondo in Rhode Island moving to end their lockdowns in their respective states and reopen?
I mean, it is amazing. You would think that Brian Kemp is alone in Georgia. He's not. And, there's obviously concern, and these governors are making decisions based on what they see on the ground and what they're hearing from the business community as well. But there's no focus on some of those Democratic states, and that's really interesting.
And has the task force been officially disbanded? We're done with task force briefings now. Guidelines are not going to be reintroduced because Trump is essentially leaving it to the states as they're following them, even as they reopen, or repurposing them even as they open. We done with that?
No. I think there'll be more task force briefings as at the president's when he feels like it. Yesterday was just answering questions from reporters, but he did it. I think that it'll shift to this reopen commission that includes CEOs and people from around the country, as well as lawmakers and people in his cabinet. And we're going to ask the president a lot about all of this this weekend in the town hall from the Lincoln Memorial.
Right.
7 to 9 p.m. live on Fox. Martha McCallum and I will have another town hall, virtual town hall, but questions from around the country, and we'll be live at the Lincoln Memorial.
And Bret, do you think by then Michael Flynn might be exonerated?
I think that the case is obviously falling apart if you look at the substance. I mean, I read Jonathan Turley, who I respect a lot. He really has a problem with all of this and the new notes that are coming out about what the FBI did prior to that interview and what they wrote down. That's what they wrote down on paper, that they were going to try to make him lie and get him fired. What didn't they write down on the paper? And so I think there's a lot of problems. But exonerated is a tough word. He may have been squeezed, but it's likely that it happened as far as what he said in those interviews to FBI agents. How it was set up and the fact that he didn't have any representation is a real problem, and I think that's where the case will hinge.
He is Bret Baier, Fox News anchor, special report, 5 p.m. Chicago time during the week, of course. #1 best-selling author of 3 Days at the Brink, his latest 3 Days book. 3 Days at the Brink, FDR's Daring Gamble to Win World War II. And again, as you just mentioned, this Sunday night, 7 to 9 p.m., Trump Town Hall.
6 to 8 your time.
Oh, 6 to 8. Yeah, right. I'm sorry. Now you got me doing it. Everything's New York. Everything's East Coast Central. 6 to 8 Chicago time. Trump Town Hall with Bret and Martha McCallum live from the Lincoln Memorial. Good stuff. Thanks for joining us, Bret. Appreciate it.
You bet. Have a good one.
You too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
Diabetes, high blood pressure, anxiety meds, everyone's on them. If you're a 50-year-old male, maybe a bit porky, and you may even have type 2 diabetes, $1 million of term insurance may only cost you about $200 a month. Call Term Provider. Speak with Big Lou at 800-555-2085. Big Lou will find a term life policy for you even if you have type 2 diabetes, are overweight, or have high blood pressure. Term Provider has helped thousands of people like you who think they can't afford term life insurance to buy $1 million of affordable